Welcome to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, our weekly podcast for software sales professionals who want to sell better. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, make Software Sales Simplified your home for insights, trends, and news from the world of enterprise software sales. I'm Matt Long, and I'm joined with my good friend, Kevin Donville. Together, we have over 50 years of enterprise software selling experience, as well as implementation as well. So we're happy you joined us today as we talk to industry experts. And I'm joined by one of them, if I might say so, a good friend and colleague of mine from the past, Chris O'Dowd. Chris, how are you today?
Good, James. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Chris and I worked together at a company called Quantum Metric. I can't remember how long ago, 6-7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
But I was always really intrigued by Chris's approach to software sales. And he has kind of a non-traditional background when you come to an enterprise software seller. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, Chris. But before we start, Kevin, how are you doing today?
Doing fabulously. Looking forward to the holidays. Don't know exactly when this episode will come out, but we're just on the cusp of Christmas. So it's a very exciting time.
So just a little background. We were all talking prior to the podcast, and we just found out we all know people from past lives at different companies for the past 25, 30 years or so. It's just really funny how things kind of come back around. So it's always good to reacquaint ourselves with old friends. And so, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us kind of what you're doing now and just kind of a little bit about how you kind of got to your position.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. I joined Quantum Metric about 10 years ago. I come from a little bit of a more diverse, kind of unique background than your typical enterprise SaaS salesperson. Before joining Quantum Metric, I was in the Marine Corps for about a decade, and then was involved with the FBI as a special agent for about another 12 years or so. Never thought I'd be in the SaaS sales field, but ironically enough, there's a lot of parallels between those careers and what I do now.
Yeah, that's definitely what I want to dig into. But that was always interesting to me. It's that your FBI background. There are other salespeople that have been in the military. So I think that there's also something there we can dig into as well.
Yeah.
I think the organization and the approach, I think is very prevalent across the good sellers I know in SaaS sales, right? You have a very methodical and deliberate approach that you take, but then you add on like the FBI investigation stuff, and it's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And I didn't realize it at the time. Chris and I worked on a couple deals. I think Comcast was our first one. Actually, we worked together.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoyed your approach to the selling process, right? And I always thought it was kind of different. So tell us a little bit. I mean, let's go back a little bit. How did you get into the Marines? What were you doing there? And then, what was that transition like when you had to go into the private sector?
Yeah. So I always wanted to be part of the military. As a young kid growing up, I think that's what a lot of young boys aspire to do somewhere in their career. And so I found myself as an officer in the Marine Corps in the late 90s. There were really no wars, no conflicts. And so a lot of people were getting out and finding other roles and responsibilities in the business world, because this was pre-2000. The economy was great. And so people were getting out of the military, looking at kind of the civilian life. And at that point, I decided to transition into the FBI. It's kind of a natural kind of parallel pathway. And I found myself as a special agent focused on financial crimes, and then transition into this kind of counterterrorism agent, and uniquely paralleled in sales. They call it confidential human source development. So you're finding individuals who have access to people, places, and things you can't get access. And so through the FBI, you learn all sorts of techniques about how to develop relationships with people you normally wouldn't talk to. It's a really kind of unique effort.
Did they give you a lot of training in this stuff, or is this something you kind of innately had, or was it a combination of both?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of training. So you go through different schools, some domestically, some overseas. There's a lot of sharing of resources between countries and different organizations. But yes, there's a whole process of spotting and assessing and developing. It's a tool. So the human source is really, at this point in the FBI, tool for your use to find out and solve a crime or access to someone or someplace. But yeah, there's all sorts of schools you go through to, they call it bump people in just normal everyday situations. But really, it's about developing a common understanding or interest in someone you normally wouldn't talk to, which is
Hmm.
ironically very similar to kind of what we all do in sales.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that genuine curiosity or interest in what's going on really serves us well across any profession, really, or in life, pretty much, right? If you just put aside your preconceptions about people or things and just generally ask, right? That's when so much is revealed to you, whether it's a software selling, exercise, or whether it's just running into someone and just finding more about them. So I think that's always something that we could always use. So how long were you in the FBI, and what made you want to transition out of that?
Yeah, I was in for about 12 years. And I have three daughters and a wife who was not interested in traveling the world. And so I was looking at others possible positions and jobs and careers. And a friend of ours who we all know was starting Quantometric, and he showed me the platform one day and said, "Hey, look, this is what we're doing. This is what we're building." I think we had maybe one or two clients, and I thought to myself, "Well, I'm not an engineer, so I can't code, I can't build that, but I could probably sell that and use my network at that point in time to access all sorts of potential clients." And so I started a part-time job with Quantum at the same time. I was a fraud investigator for UBS Financial Services, but started doing Quantum at night. And I quickly understood I didn't have a book of and CIOs and digital executives I knew, so I had to find a direct route to these folks. And what I did is I found a website called Charity Buzz, and Charity Buzz was a company that was auctioning off dinners, events, lunches with actors and famous people and athletes. And one of those categories was executives. And so I would find the executives that work for those companies who I knew were our target companies. I could find out the technologies they were using. And I knew before I bid on these auctions that this person, if we got in front of them and had an organic conversation, could potentially be a client. So I bid on several of these major retailers in the South, major airlines, and myself. And our CEO would go in front of these people and have a conversation about themselves, their role, their charity. And they knew it was also a business conversation. So at some point, Quantum would come up. And we probably did this 5 or 6 times, spent my own money on it, but I knew the ROI was there if the conversation, the need was organic in it. And it was absolutely a great way to shortcut that, that link to that persona we needed to get in front of is wonderful.
Yeah, that's the
For
story I remember. I didn't quite remember the details. I'm glad you brought it up because I do remember that where you were, you invested your own money in bidding on these things or whatever it was. And
Yeah,
I was like so impressed with that because it's kind of thinking outside the box, right? It's like you kind of think about, well, how can I get an intro? How can I do that?
yeah.
And willing to put your own money down on it as well, knowing that there's a payoff. And I'm sure that it paid dividends for you in the long run. But I always thought that was a great story. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So let's see, when you first got into sales, beyond that, what were the things that you really liked, and what were some of the things that you felt like you had to work on when you first got into enterprise selling?
Yeah, I think joining Quantometric to me was another environment of kind of the Marine Corps, the FBI, where it's kind of a chaotic situation. It's a startup, it's a small group of people focused on some instrumental task. That was really exciting to me, but I knew quickly that walking into these boardrooms, I didn't have the SaaS experience that my counterparts might have had. So for me, that was the biggest hurdle I had to overcome was
Hmm.
how do you understand the technology? How do you understand kind of the sales philosophy and that type of scenario? And how do you win with those combinations of ideas? To me, that was a very uncomfortable scenario that I had to, understand over a period of time.
What about working with other team members and things like that, especially SCs? Because I know I enjoyed working with you, but it's like coming in and having resources that you could then deploy, I think is an interesting thing that you generally don't have, right? But what was that like?
Yeah, absolutely. It provides a level of comfort. So if you walk into a room, I quickly realize that our SEs, our executive team were very, very smart individuals. So I knew after a number of months that when you walked into a room, I may not know the technical answer, but I knew our SEs were some of the smartest people in the room. And the questions, we typically receive were, 10, 20, about the same questions over a period of time. So having that level of comfort in your team to me is, you can't replace that.
Yeah, I'm curious, Chris, first of all, as a pre-sales person, I appreciate your acknowledgement and recognizing of that skill set that the pre-sales people have. But kind of counter to that, I think your background relative to things you did with the FBI with respect to doing all that investigative work. I came from the legal field before I went and
Hmm.
became a hardcore consultant, and I did a lot of field investigation in interviews and stuff like that. And in the sales methodology that Matt and I have, the section that's all about starting the inquisitive part of the engagement, we call it a motive, for motive then opportunity. There was a lot of the tactics and skills and techniques that I'd learned there I would bring into the sales world as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you see that transition as well? You were like, this is a natural fit. There's a natural flow here because of that.
Absolutely. I think Matt might have referenced before, you have to have the interest, the sincere interest in the conversation you're having with this person. What are you trying to solve? What's the problem? And that may be 3 or 5 or 6 levels deep. But I think what I've seen from a lot of sales counterparts is people don't have this sincere interest. They want to make a sale, but you have to have that sincere interest in what that person is going through. Your goal has to be able to help that person. My goal is to build that partnership. It could take a year, it could take 2 years, it could take 3 years. But to your point, yes, the whole point of those conversations is to find out what that core issue is that we can help solve. And I think it was John McMahon I heard on a podcast the other day. His quote was, listening to understand, not to answer. To me, that is a highly overlooked trait of people want to answer before they actually understand what the situation is.
You must have been doing an awful lot of cross referencing in your head as a result of that. I know that you're talking about question to understand the kind of the thing that I've brought up on other podcasts before. And also when I run sales enablement, that interest, that curiosity is the way that I often refer.
Mhm. Yeah.
For people like Matt and I on the pre-sale side, it's because we're motivated while we are coin operated like the salespeople are. We're motivated
Yeah.
to solve the problem. And we want to be able to talk about how we can do that with our solution. So when we're asking those questions, we're trying to get to what's the problem and how do I fix it? I would imagine the FBI interrogatory process is probably different, but how easily were you able to go and apply that when you came over?
Yeah, I didn't realize the parallels between those 2 careers is as much as they do exist. I did not put it together until I realized, oh my gosh, this is like an interview. There's a big difference between an interview and interrogation, but those same skill sets are listening intently, trying to understand what that person is going through, putting yourself in their shoes, having a list of questions that could change, but knowing that's, there's the desired goal at the end.
Mm.
But to your point, yeah, it's very, very similar. And I think people try to rush to that process when in reality, that's probably the most important part of the conversation. Um, People want to rush a demo. They want to rush. Let me show you what I have. There's the old sales adage of the doctor analogy. Like I can't prescribe a medicine or treatment until I know what the issue is. And your doctor or your lawyer asks a ton of questions. Why is that? Because they're trying to assess what your problem is. And a lot of times I think sales people try to get too fast to the kind of the pitch
Right.
versus what's Kevin trying to solve for.
Yeah, it seems like there's, for a lot of salespeople, there's kind of a checklist of like, okay, these are the things you're looking out for, and you're just checking them off. And as soon as you get there, it's like, all right, I got it. This is the way to go, right? And that approach works sometimes, but a lot of times you're jumping to conclusions and just really not digging in enough. Yeah, so I'm just curious, obviously you have a naturally inquisitive nature that
Yeah.
got you into this path, but as we're kind of sorting through this stuff, do you have like a way that you kind of record this stuff yourself? You write it down, or you have like a template, or is it a list of questions, or methodology? Because obviously we have one that we wrote down in our book, but I'm just always curious because a lot of times this stuff is in people's heads. But what do you do to make it repeatable so that you're always consistently not asking the same things, but finding out the things that are important for
Yeah,
you?
it's a good question. Yeah, I keep notes, very detailed notes, as any investigator would in a legal situation. In the FBI, you have to record everything on a piece of paper because it's admissible in court. In this situation, I'll go back after those conversations, write down detailed notes, find out where those existing gaps are, so then you can go back to that second interview. I think something else people don't do very well is repeat what they've heard. A key area is understanding correctly. I mean, you have your version of what you thought, what you said. I think I understood, but repeating those conversations back to fully understand what was said to you, using some of the same verbiage back to them to make sure you're on the same page. But yeah, keeping good notes to me is an absolute must.
I just imagine like the little notepad that you're writing down and things like that. But how has AI changed this? Because now meetings are
Yes,
recorded. I mean, I agree with you. I was a big note taker because I feel like the physical act of writing something down helps me
yes,
keep it in my mind. This is from growing up, learning to study and things like that for classes. But now with AI, right, everything's captured, right? So where are you with that? How do you use that, or do you still write
no,
things
you're
down?
absolutely right. Gong or Zoom has changed all that. And I go back to those recordings and listen to them on my phone in my car. I'll listen to other sales team members in our company. I'll listen to their phone
Mhm.
conversations as well to understand what they're going through. But to me, that is another, I don't say an advantage, but point that you can actually really utilize. Um, to your advantage, but to understand what they're saying. I mean, we're all in these conversations. You might have a slide deck up, you may not, but you may be talking in a room, but having a recording afterwards, not really hear what was said. y- We miss a ton of information if you're in the middle of a conversation that without having to go back and listen to it, you would completely miss. Those type of technologies have been a huge blessing to our field for sure.
Yeah, I think I as an SE, I always wanted to be brought into the very first
Yeah.
conversation, discovery and everything, because the understanding and hearing and having two sets of ears too, hearing what they're saying and then being able to collaborate afterwards. I always not hated it. That's a strong word, but like whenever the sales guy said, I'll
Yeah.
take it and I'll just
Yeah.
give you the notes, right? It's like, well, that's your perspective on what happened, which may be correct, right? But at the same time, why wouldn't we have two sets of individuals listening to this and then kind
Yeah.
of collaborating what the next steps are? So, yeah, hearing firsthand, from that person, the intonation, the pauses, and all the things that you can't tell how much important that
I also
is.
think it's people overlook the importance of in-person conversations. Zoom and virtual has become the default meeting location, but that's a very walled off experience. When you're next to someone, you can see them, you can kind of get a sense of their body language. To me, that is even more important. There's a technique in human source development called mirroring, and that's actually understanding their body language. Are they closed off? Are they open? Are they leaning into you? Are they leaning back? These are all signals that you can then utilize to understand, hey, is this person really understanding what I'm saying? Or am I offending them? Or am I saying something that doesn't make sense? It's very hard to get that context in a two-dimensional version of that. Whereas if you're in a room with three or four or five individuals, I can quickly assess where people are leaning in, where people are not, who am I losing? All those things are very important to the conversation in general.
Yeah, and I imagine you're also one of the other things I think that there's context they're sitting in. If you're in the same room together, you're being subjected to the same environmental elements. The temperature of the room, is it noisy? There's there stuff going on in the background that you can't see in their camera, but are things that are distracting
Yeah.
them from being able to give you the answer so that you can interpret the feedback they're giving you, both consciously and unconsciously. I'm curious then, because you said something earlier on. I want to come back to it and link it to what you just talked about. You talked about not turning that interview into an interrogation. And I know that, the things we were just talking about with respect to those other techniques that you bring to the table are all part of keeping it an interview, keeping it a conversation. What advice would you give to somebody who says, hey, man, I don't want to ask a million questions. I'm afraid they're going to feel like they're getting the third degree. What would you say to somebody
Yeah.
like that?
In the FBI, that was a tool. That was a tool utilized for a desired end state. In this field, it is a desire to be a partner with someone. I'm looking to help them solve something over a long-term scenario. Some of the best friends I have are former and current customers who you've developed partnerships with. So you want to be cognizant of what you're asking. You want to be, how would you say, aware of whether you're actually asking questions to improve your position for sale, or actually are you asking questions to get to the answer so you can help them? And I think people see through that. I mean, we've all been in meetings where you can tell a junior salesperson is asking these questions to kind of encircle a potential prospect, when your true solution or effort should be, Kevin, how can I ask the right questions to listen and understand your problem to help you solve that? That should be your goal. And that's, to me, the dance that you have in that type of scenario of offending someone, asking them 8 questions in a row versus listening to them for, a half hour.
I think if you're passionate about the solution you're
Yes.
selling, and you're genuinely excited about the potential for you to be able to help them, I think people are smart enough and have enough intuition that they pick up on the genuine nature of that. If you are in fact being genuine, as opposed to if you're faking it, they'll pick up on that just as easily as well. And to your point, being in the room face to face must empower you much more to be successful. That, I would imagine, to be able to go and convey that more successfully.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said generally curious. To me, that's a lacking trait in our kind of persona of in our career. I want to be in the room with you because I generally want to be next to you. I want to understand what you're going through and kind of see how you're reacting to what we can help you solve. And to me, that's a relationship you develop over months and years, not days and weeks. That's not a quarterly effort. That's a lifelong kind of pursuit.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about kind of what's changed in the last 10 years that you've been in sales. But I mean, the first one that comes to mind, obviously, is
Mm.
Zoom and the lack of in-person meetings. Where are you with that? Where do you feel it's come in terms of your ability to actually go fly somewhere or drive somewhere and meet someone in a room? Because sometimes, yeah, I would like to do that as well. But like, we're all scattered all over the place. There's no reason for you to come to the
Yeah.
headquarters because there's no one there, right?
Right.
So, how are you approaching that? Because I found it very difficult to sustain relationships and things because of that. What is your
Yeah, it's the
experience?
days of having your CRO tell you to go camp out in the lunchroom may not be as productive as they once were because people are working 3 days a week from the office and 2 days a week from home. I'd say find something that excites them. Find a place, whether it's a restaurant or a sporting event. Again, understand what they enjoy, what their persona is. Do they like soccer? Do they like sushi? And make it a real encounter and a real conversation and a real benefit for them versus just showing up in the conference room. To me, that I'd rather meet you for a meal and talk about your life for an hour and maybe 30 minutes about the business. To me, that's more exciting. I'm curious about who you are as a person. Yes, that's my job, is to sell a software that will help your company. But in reality, I'd rather spend my time with someone I have some sort of commonality with. To me, that's done in some sort of non-business environment. to me, that's what I strive for. Get out of Zoom,
Yeah. I
show up in
mean,
person somewhere.
that that's my experience too, because I do think, I mean, there are times when the big conference room with everyone involved is
Yeah,
a good thing to have if you can get it, right? But the biggest value is like, well, look, I'm going to be in town. Let's go get some
yeah.
dinner and just like, or a drink and just talk about some stuff, et cetera. We'll go do this thing and, and make it a little bit more social and not so business focused, right? I think that's pretty much the value. I mean, how much you find yourself traveling these days in pursuit of sales
I'd say
campaigns?
maybe 2 to 3 days every other week is, it ebbs and flows, but, in my territory now is more concise than what it used to be. I mean, you can fly in and have 3 or 4 meetings in 2 days, brunch, lunch or
Mm.
dinner, something like that, and you don't have to spend weeks on end, but to me, the benefit of that could take the place of 4 or 5 Zoom calls, and you're gonna have a better you're gonna talk about things you wouldn't talk about on Zoom. You're gonna have conversations that, quite frankly, build that relationship outside of the business scenarios. To me, there's nothing better than sharing a meal with someone because you hear about their life, but you also, talk about business as well. So I'm a big believer in travel for sure.
What else has changed in terms of buyers'
Mm.
expectations or things in the past 10 years? What have you seen
I
there?
think there's a lot more education you can do online. I mean, there's a lot of things
Mm.
you can. I think I saw a report the other day where they're probably 60% through, 70% through the buying process before they even talk to someone. And I get that. You don't want to
Mm.
spend your days speaking and you don't have time for it. So you're doing all this online research, you're talking to references, clients or friends who've been in the same situation. So I think a lot of that is done before they meet you. I mean, you looked at a lot of LinkedIn profiles, people in my profession move around a lot. Unfortunately, they chase a dollar. And so I see folks who've been at companies 2 and 3 years and have moved around a lot. To me, I think that is a sign of maybe not what I strive for, but I do believe there's a lot more skepticism out there with our clients, our prospects, our partners. They do a lot more research. I don't blame them for it. I think it's a great way to take approach before you actually do like a RFP process or you meet with people like myself. So I do think there's a lot more education before they meet with a salesperson.
I'm curious with respect to that. You're talking about the research that people are doing. We've had a number of folks come on to onto the podcast talking about how their organization has been helped and also harmed by the reliance that buyers are having now on
Mm.
artificial intelligence to conduct that research for them. Are you seeing that being a helpful trend, a harmful trend? And how are you either leveraging it or correcting for it in your sales cycles?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of question marks out there to what it can actually do for your process or for their process. I do think it's a great way to get high level information, whether it's on quantum metric or some other competitive situation or solution. We use it ourselves in overviews of companies, but there are limitations. And to me, the best thing I've recommended for my clients or prospects is talk to someone. Talk to someone who's used quantum. Talk to someone who I've worked with for 3 or 4 or 5 years. To me, that's the best reference. It's a one-to-one
Mm.
conversation with someone who's been in your shoes, who's maybe used quantum metric as a customer. Now, maybe that works for us now. Those things to me are key. I do think there's a lot of initial kind of work effort that AI can really help with, that can help solidify those initial conversations, but I think it's still developing.
Since there's so much that is done prior to even talking to a salesperson, as a salesperson, do you feel like you can influence or control or affect that in any way at all? Or is it just kind of like once you get them to connect with you, then your job begins? Or how do you feel about that? The fact that you don't have all those touch points early on?
I think it goes back to asking questions. So there's always going to be some sort of preconceived
Mm.
notion of what quantum is and how we can help them solve their specific situation. To me, it goes back to what are you trying to solve? You have to have in-depth conversations with these partners and clients. To me, there's no other substitute for that. Um, We all want to try to get the answers online with AI and through ChatGPT, but quite frankly, we all know they have limitations. So to me, it's show up on a
Mm.
phone call. What do you know about quantum metric? What are you trying to solve? And let me ask 5 or 6 questions. And that to me is the best way to understand what they're trying to solve.
Yeah, and how do you turn around a conversation? Because I've had it before too, where they already have the answers, they have the
Yeah.
questions they want, and then they want to talk to you and just get those answers, right? And so they're very deliberate. They're kind of standoffish a little bit. I mean, how do you kind of change that around a bit so it becomes more of a conversation and something where you can actually ask meaningful questions of them as opposed to just rapid fire answering questions of theirs?
So we've all been in situations where there's closed off RFP processes where you can't actually access the
Mm,
business team or the users. You're dealing with procurement or legal. Those are almost impossible to get direct access to converse.
right.
Yeah,
It's always like, no, no, don't talk
you
to
have
us.
to try, but they usually
Uh,
block them off. To me, we had a really good Delta Airlines is a great customer of ours. And we started with them, I think it's 2.5 years ago. And quite frankly, it's a mutual agreement of, hey, here's our team, here's our use cases. Come on in and have a conversation. And when you can put yourself in the same room, that's the key. But it takes both sides. And sometimes you just don't have it. So you have to try as much as you can to meet to get in that same room and listen to those different teams, those different users, and understand what their situation is. To me, that's what I found is you try to get in front of the most people as you possibly can, and that's when you get a full picture of what the actual problem is. You have to try, and I think a lot of times people just don't
mm.
try, and sometimes you're kind of held back at the door. Other times they say, "Come on in and talk to us." And those to me are the best partnerships because it's an open kind of two-way partnership.
Yeah, you've dealt with a lot of very large organizations like Delta and Comcast and others as well, which I think there's a unique skill and approach when you're talking to a large organization
Yeah.
like that, because just like you mentioned, there's so many different people that have influence or have a say or important in this decision. What has your approach been to those kind of large enterprise sales, in terms of really getting in front of or understand the needs of all the potential people that have a stake in
Yeah,
this?
I think you have to understand there's different personas, there's different use cases, there's different teams. And the business team that handles, say, voice of customer may not have the same use, need, or want of your solution that the IT and the dev and the product teams do and want and need. And sometimes you can satisfy both, sometimes you can't. But you have to quickly understand that there are different teams with different needs, different levels of manpower, of different priorities. And to me, though, you can't assume your solution is going to be the answer for all these things. Sometimes it's not, but you have to be able to tailor your question. You have to understand what their role is and what their responsibilities are. And I think a lot of times salespeople try to put them in the same box, and that's not it. It's a different scenario. It's a different team. It's a different use case. Again, it's that, Kevin, to what you said. It's a genuine, curious interest to help that person out.
So I'm I completely agree with what you're saying there. I do think it really comes down to that genuine curiosity. We're talking now about being able to go and fit the solution, the use case to our solution with respect to that
Yeah.
mapping exercise of mapping value to correction. But that requires them to have opened up and given you the keys and really kind of allowed you to peel back the onion with respect to your understanding of what that business case is. You have to earn
Mhm.
trust. In some organizations, particularly the ones you talk about, the large organizations where it started with a procurement based RFP, that could be a hard row to hoe. What are some of the tactics or techniques you've used over the years? And if those have changed, point it out to get to trust. How do you speed that path to trust so you can get to the use
Yeah, I
case?
think maybe we didn't talk about this before, but truth, honesty, trust, validation of the partnership are key things that you have to build. Getting there quickly typically doesn't work.
Mm,
To me, that's something that it's not genuine. I do things to where I can small things to build trust. Have one-off conversations give them more insight into my situation, maybe more than I would typically tell someone. It's things that you just have to be able to read the room, understand what they're searching for, what they need, bring it down to a personal level. I've done things where give people gifts after the initial close of a deal, things like books or, just things that we've talked about as just a way to say thank you. To me, being sincere and saying thank you builds all sorts of trust. But to your point, there's no silver bullet for building trust. It's a scenario that changes on every single relationship, but it's something that I think, again, is overlooked. But to me, that's the key to building a long-term relationship past that initial sale. I've had people who said, "Hey, Chris, this team wanted a competitor. This team wanted you guys. You came in, you heard us, you knew our use cases, you built trust, you spent time." To me, time is something that builds a ton of trust. Flying in, spending 4 or 5 days with a team, or coming in and saying, "Hey, let's sit with you guys during the holiday rush, Black Friday or Cyber Monday." Those are things to where spending time with someone, that builds trust, and people will quickly overlook that. To me, that's just one example, but to your point, this is something that is built over a period of time through all sorts of scenarios and difficult situations. That's where the true friendship, in my opinion, is solidified.
Yeah. So you've been doing this a long time, 10 years, at the same
Yeah.
company, no less, selling the same solution successfully. But, I'm just curious from your perspective, what's next in terms of what else you need to learn, or what else would you like to know that can keep fueling, one, just the interest and enthusiasm in this, but also to adapt to whatever changing climate is happening. Where are the areas that you're looking to
Yeah,
advance
I
next?
think anyone who thinks they've learned everything is sorely mistaken. I'm trying to educate myself constantly, and that's the whole thing of my philosophy is constant education is a key to success. If you ever think, "Hey, I've got this. I'm on top of my game," it'll be an interesting year for sure. To me, it's just understanding where clients are, AI, with the use of AI, the use of different technologies, doing more research on your prospects, honing your skill sets, listening to gong calls from the exceptional salespeople in your teams, listening to podcasts like this. Those are all things that if I could take one bit of information from each interaction with someone, to me that's the key. There's all sorts of things you can learn from anyone, and to me that's another aspect about relationships. Everyone has something to learn from someone. You may not agree on everything, but there's always something I can learn from Matt or from Kevin. To me, that's the key to life is how do I continuously learn from other people? And these days, the access to those types of information, it's never ending.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a great skill to have. And it's so, I think, difficult now in this day and age because you can surround yourself with that echo chamber of just
Yeah,
proving out things that you already
yeah.
believe, right? And so being able to just pause and just like, okay, what am I looking at? How can I think differently about this? I think is a real skill that's it's getting harder and harder to do. Everything we engage with is in a feedback loop of things that get you engaged more. So try to step out of that a bit and or step back and just to look at the big picture, I think is a great skill to have. And that comes with, understanding where you still need to grow.
You also have to assess your losses. You also have to look at your losses. To me, that's the biggest realization of your areas of weakness or where you need to work on those key areas is look at your loss. What happened? What did we not do right? And not just pass over that experience. To me, that is you learn more from the losses than you do the wins. I think many people have said that, but it's a very true statement.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, Chris, this has been a great conversation. We're gonna start wrapping it up, but before we go, I just want any thoughts you might have for someone just starting out in sales or and things like that. What to kind of any advice you'd have for them in terms of how to get started or things like that.
Yeah, I think you just have to find an organization to get involved with. To me, I think Gretzky had a great quote: "Is if you don't take the shot, you never get the goal." So you have
Right.
to take a chance. I think there's a lot of worries about your knowledge base or your skill set. Just get out there and try it. You'll learn more in the field in 2 years than you will if you don't try it. So to me, it's find an SDR job, a BDR job, a a sales role and just start doing it. And to me, that's where you really learn the techniques. Things like this podcast are a huge advantage as well. So just get out there and try. I mean, I didn't have any sales experience when I started. We all know that the fear that you have to overcome when you first start in this any new field, but soon enough, you learn.
Well, for those that don't know, quantum metric is in kind of customer experience analytics. And one of our pitches there when I was selling that and similar solutions was you have no idea what your customers are trying to do on your website. You might
Yeah,
think you know, but when you actually see what they're doing, you're like, oh my God. So I think it goes along the lines of like, just
yeah,
try it out and understand and get real feedback from the
yeah,
field, right? And whether that's talking to people, trying out messaging, or just trying out conversations, or just seeing experience that people have, I think that's a lesson for all of us for sure.
yeah. I'd say find a mentor too. Find someone who's been doing it for a decade, 2 decades. You can learn. You can take a shortcut for sure. Find that mentor that's been there and done that, and that's a huge way to learn.
All right, cool, Chris. Thanks so much. Before we go, if people want to get in touch with you, just to connect or find out more about you and your approach, or just more about quantum metric, what would be the best way for people to
Yeah,
reach
LinkedIn
you?
is probably the best. I'm on LinkedIn, obviously daily in our field. So hit me up on LinkedIn. My phone number's on there, email address. Send me a message. Love to talk to you anytime.
Okay, we'll put all that in the description for this podcast, all the links as well as a bit more of your bio, which has been fascinating. So thanks so much, Chris. Kevin, anything you'd like to say before we
Thank you very much for Chris for coming in. Somebody who had a legal background, I really appreciate your organic, from my perspective, approach to selling's all about
Yeah,
understanding the problem, take the time, talk to the customer, find out what's going on and be genuine about that. I could not
yeah,
agree more strongly with that whole approach because to your comment about the path to trust, I mean, if you show true
yeah.
interest, that's a great way to go and build that relationship. And it doesn't surprise me at all that you've got lifelong friendships with some of your customers. I think it's a reflection of that honesty. So thank you very much for coming in today and sharing that with
Gentlemen,
us.
thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Merry Christmas and have a great week. Thank you.
You
thank
too.
you. As we wrap it up here, I just want to remind everyone if you enjoyed this content and want to stay abreast of similar types of conversations that influence the enterprise software and SaaS field, please like and subscribe or leave a comment about other things you like to hear. But for that, we're going to wrap it up. Again, thank you so much for listening to us this week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, gents. Thank you.